Hi everyone, this is Julia of the Drop Stitches podcast. You can find me on Ravelry as Sci-Fi Child and in the Ravelry group for Drop Stitches podcast. And you can also find me on Instagram as julia.redman, R-E-D-M-A-N. We're going to do a short today, a very topic-specific episode about my approach to doing kind of a direct dye eco-printing method that also uses some acid dyes. What inspired me to do this is there's been a lot of really nice posts recently on Instagram of people doing these direct dye eco printing methods, and you get some really beautiful results with that, and it's just a fun way to play with and explore the plants that are in your garden or nearby. And you can get some really unexpected results. Some plants aren't going to really give you a whole lot, and some will give you some surprises. Well, let's see, so you can go and see what real eco-printing looks like. Look at some of the feeds from Ninja Chickens, A Verb for Keeping Warm, and The Wild Diary. I think A Verb for Keeping Warm has done some. But in any case, there's probably a tag that you can search as well. So check that out and see what it looks like when it's done the right way. And now I'm going to show you my way. So let's look at what I have here today. I'm just going to turn my ghetto camera, which is just my computer, and show you what I have. So I have some Japanese maple leaves. We'll see what happens there. We should at least get some tannins out of that. I have some lamb's quarter. This is a very common weed you'll find all over the place. It is edible, although I must admit I personally have never eaten it for whatever reason, but I do pick it quite frequently to feed to my rabbits and horses when we have an excess, which we always do because I always let it go to seed. I have a couple of clematis blooms. I really haven't any idea what we'll get out of these. I've never used clematis blooms before. I have some, this is wild St. Johns Wort, just about ready to open its flowers. If you're thinking this looks rather small for St. Johns Wort, because I know probably a lot of you grow this in your garden, that's because this is wild St. Johns Wort. The domesticated St. Johns Wort is on quite a bigger scale, most likely from selective breeding and I don't know, perhaps it's also tetraploid. I've always wondered about that, but I'll probably never know. The plant St. Johns Wort has a rich history in ethnobotany and is quite famous for its use as a antidepressant or might be anti-anxiety. I would look that up. And if I were you. And there's quite a bit of research on it, actually. It's very widely used for this. And that's usually the flowering tops, as I recall. The interesting thing about extracts of the flowering tops and the use of St. Johns Wort in general as a dye plant is the extracts, although it has yellow flowers, I don't know if you can really see that terribly well. The flowers are going to be yellow. The extracts are red. Like red like my hair is red, and quite beautiful. And you can get that quite easily in a dye bath, although to get a large coverage of it, you'd need a lot of plants. So it's really well suited to a thing like this if you just have a few flowers. Now, normally I do this with open flowers, so I'm not really sure how much color we're going to get out of these closed ones, but we'll find out. And then over here, I have some vetch flowers, and vetch is just a common weed in the pea family. I don't really know if it has any uses, ethnobotanically speaking, but as a member of the pea family, it is commonly planted for its nitrogen fixation capabilities, and, they're pretty little flowers. Oh, look, we got a little tiny cricket there, too. Now we don't. He went somewhere else. Now, what I've got over to my left here is a silk sock blank that I've washed and soaked in a vinegar solution. You can buy these online from a few probably a few different places. I can't quite remember where I got these. I bought a bunch of these years ago to have kind of a dye day with my sisters and my mom. It was a lot of fun, and I've had some leftovers laying around for a while, so sometimes I pull them out and use them for something like this. I have no doubt that normally eco-printing is probably normally done with more traditional fixatives or just the use of tannins themselves, but I've had good results using vinegar before, so that's what we're doing here, and also because I'm using the acid dyes. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull apart these plants a little bit and arrange some leaves on the silk blank. I'm going to do a variety of ups and downs, because what I'm going to do in the end is flip the whole thing over. And I don't know if the colors will be different on either sides. Oops. We should also do them in different directions. There we go. Let's be consistent. Okay. So again, I don't really know what I'll get out of these guys, but most tree leaves are going to give you some amount of tannins. Since these have some red going on, there's possibility we'll get something else, but I think it's also not a great possibility. So don't get your hopes up. It's all an adventure. The use of the vinegar may also be a modifier to some of the colors. Okay, so we got those out, and so what I'm going to do with these, let's see. Let's just take the stem off and put the whole thing like so. And then we'll put the second flower. Don't go to sleep, little computer. Like so. Okay. And then I'm just going to take a few of these lamb's quarter leaves and place them here and there. I may or may not get anything out of these. Generally, the most you get out of a plant like this is some shade of pale yellow, but that can be nice too. Okay, and we're starting to run out of space here. Alright, so we're going to lay some of these guys down. And you'll notice that I'm not getting too close to the edge, and you'll see why in a minute, although some of these leaves are quite close to the edge. Okay, so I've got a couple of flowers in here. I'm going to make sure I get good use out of those. Alright, that's enough of that. And then we'll lay down the veitch. They're quite lovely little things, aren't they? They look kind of like tiny wisteria. And it just occurred to me that I can overlap these if I want to. Because of the fact that we will be folding the scarf over. Alright, good enough. You want a close-up look? Hold on to your lunch, I'm going to move the computer. There we go. It's a nice arrangement. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is just take the other half of the scarf, which I had hanging below the table, just so I know where my middle is. And I'm going to see if I can fold this over. Does not always work as planned. Oh, that didn't go so bad. Okay. It's starting to dry out a little bit. I've had it laying here a while. Alright. 1 second. I'm just going to re-wet it a tiny bit. Okay, maybe a lot. Don't freak out, it's fine. When you're going to heat things, and I'm going to heat this in the microwave, by the way, because I'm that guy. I want to make sure that it doesn't burn. I've seen that happen with a silk scarf, by the way, where it was a little bit too dry. And it was actually when my sisters and my mom and I were doing the dye day. And someone, I don't remember who it was, tried, we had both acid dyes and, you know, like Kool-Aid and cake dyes, cake icing dyes, that sort of thing. I'm just pressing the bubbles out right now since I got it sopping wet. Anyway, someone attempted getting some really heavy color saturation by applying the Kool-Aid directly to the pre-wetted scarf. And we had a little bit, we had it in a glass pan, and we had a little bit of moisture in there, but it apparently wasn't enough. And between the silk scarf being on the dry side, and probably because there's, you know, sugar in Kool-Aid mix, it burnt a hole through the scarf. It was pretty wild, actually. Guess we're lucky it didn't catch on fire. So live and learn. Don't do that at home, kids. Alright. Just about done there. Okay. Now I'm gonna just roll it up. Now I think that folks who do real eco printing tend to roll their scarf around something. And that something can be something like a lead pipe or a stick or any other thing. And you're just trying to get good contact between the fabric and the materials. But you can imagine how a lead pipe may also have the modification ability of adding a different mordant. Pardon me, I'm just going to wake the computer up. I like to make sure it's still recording periodically. It is. Lucky you. Alright. So there it is, all rolled up. All the materials squashed in there, in their various places. So what I'm going to do now is put this over here so the water doesn't get on all the things. And I'm going to take a piece of string. This is some not very good hand spun. And I'm just going to start, let's see, how did I do this the last time? I think I did this. Okay, so I've folded it in half. And what I'm going to do is wrap tightly with this yarn. And I'm essentially creating a resist just with the yarn, because the dye in the dye pot that I'm going to use in a second here will not be able to penetrate through this. I do think I want to do that differently. Alright, hang on a second. We're going to unravel this because I want that center to be covered. Because that's where my vetch flowers are and I want to know what color they give. Look, I'm already seeing a little color bleeding there. Can you see that? A little bit? The reason that this wool is green, by the way, is because the last time I used it, I was using a green bath. So why don't we just continue wrapping in that manner? So this is essentially the same as doing tie-dye right here. So all of these covered spaces are not going to be able to absorb any dye from the acid dye. And I don't have quite enough. So I'm going to grab some of this from the undye. Alright. Good enough, you think? Seems pretty well covered. I'm just doing this to be an extra level. Alright, let's see. There we go. There we go. Super fabulous, don't you think? Alright. Got junk everywhere here. Alright. Here's my dye pot. I've got a little dye liquor in there. It's a pretty pale solution, so I don't expect much out of it. And that's partly because I just didn't want to blow out the colors on the inside with, you know, whatever I had on the edges. I want it to be an accent, not the center stage. Okay, so there should be some level of dye absorption on the ends here that are loose, and it'll vary, as you can tell, across the length of the scarf. So what I'm going to do is just stick that in the dye bath, and I'm going to microwave these, and when it's cool, I'll come back and I'll try to splice in the second half of what's happening when it's cool and we're doing the unwrap so you can see the results. Alright, I'll be back later. Hey everybody, so this is a second scarf that I've set up, and I just wanted to show it to you really quickly before I throw it in the dye pot. It has a combination of red onion skins, which will give us tannins. The little strips that you see in random places here, that's birch bark that has come off naturally early this spring. I wanted to see what that would give me. And then across here are some of the scraps from the previous scarf. So we've got a few of the leaves from the lamb's quarter, the leaves from the maple, words are failing me, those stems that I pulled off of the clematis flowers, and a few of the little leafy scraps and things from the St. Johns Wort. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one in to cook, and we'll see you later. Hi everybody, we're back, and it's a bit later, and they've all been cooked, and they're ready to unwrap. So first impressions, the green is a bit darker than I thought it was going to be. Despite the fact that there was very little dye in there. But, you know, silk really sucks up the dye. And second of all, what was supposed to be a purple, okay, the camera does not lie. This is basically black. So I'm kind of hoping some of this is going to rinse out a little bit. And, oh, we might be okay. Wait just a second. Alright, so let's go ahead and unwrap some of these and see what they look like. Because of the fact that purple and, well, reds always tend to bleed, I'm going to start with the one that didn't have any dye on it. So this one was done without any acid dye. This was the one I showed you on the table. And it just has the plants in it. I'm sorry, I'm making obnoxious noises. When you wrap tons of string around it, it does take a long time to get it undone. Alright. If you're hearing weird noises in the background, it's just my water treatment equipment. Don't be frightened. So it's looking pretty promising there. As I was wrapping this up, I was seeing some, oh my gosh, I was seeing some pink leach out towards the ends, so I decided not to do dye with this one. And what I did with it was I just wrapped it in a damp washcloth and microwaved it for a few minutes that way, so that, you know, it was basically steaming it. That looks pretty fantastic. What is that? That must be from the onion skins. I'm rather surprised, because in the past when I've done onion skins, even red ones, they have not been pink. But this time apparently they're giving me pink. Maybe, I don't even know what to think. I think I did put a lot more acid on here. Maybe that makes a difference. We'll see if it changes color when it gets washed. So there's tons of plant trash on here. And because there was so much stuff on it, I can't even right now really tell what did what for us here, but that's okay. Wait a minute, here's a place where there's some birch stuck down. No, it doesn't really look like much to me. Oh well. So I'm just kind of pushing this off the plant material. It's all pretty much spent at this point, I would think. Although bark, you know, I think sometimes reusable, so maybe I'll try boiling that and see what happens. So some of it doesn't really want to cut off. So I'm just going to throw it into a bucket here and rinse it out. And let's unwrap the next one. Stay awake, little computer. Now, while I'm taking forever to unwrap the green one, let me squeeze out some of the water. Okay. While I'm unwrapping the green one here, I'm just going to tell you what comes next and how I do this. So I'm going to rinse them out in some plain water. And then what I'll do is wash them like any other piece of dye work. And after that, while they're still wet, I will steam iron them. You know, iron them with a hot iron to try to work out the kinks. Because unfortunately, one of the problems of working with silk in the way that I am here is that it kind of gets crinkly. And it's really hard to get those crinkles out. Silk doesn't like to give up its crinkles. You see that right there? Those nice little bits? That'll be the St. Johns Wort flowers. Isn't that a fantastic color? Now the plants are still in there, but you're getting the first impression of it. And it does look like those red maple leaves might have leached some color for us. Something certainly did. It smells pretty hideous. I actually think that's from the lamb's quarter, which just turned into mush. I wouldn't recommend using lamb's quarter. It's kind of disgusting. Live and learn, live and learn. But we've got kind of some pink streaks down the center, which I think is all those maple leaves. I don't imagine that anything else yielded that. We might have gotten a little bit of something out of those big clematis flowers. But it's really hard to tell because I really do think that the purple has really leached out of those maple flowers. And then we've got little bits of color here and there from, like that, from the St. Johns Wort. It's really fabulous. It's interesting. I'd like to know from where exactly on the flower that color is leaching out. It's really interesting. I think you're looking at the other side. Okay, and we'll wash that one out too. And let's do this dark purple next. It might turn my fingers a little purple. There's a lot of this purple dye left over. Apparently I put more in there than I thought. But that's okay. I'll just use it tomorrow to dye some yarn. Because I'm out of scarves. I think I'll order some more because I do like doing this. It's quite a lot of fun. And it's a surprise every time. Like I was saying with the onions. They've always come out brown. So we'll see if they change color, like I said. The other thing about natural dyes is you can't really count on your first impressions being, you know, the Mr. right now is not necessarily the Mr. forever in terms of natural dyes because of the fact that they do fade over time and they can change with pH. So, although a lot of dyes can. Got a little zebra action there. What do you think? So that's just the exposed bits. So let's see. Oh man. So we still got this one. You guys didn't see me put together. And you can see that we've got some different things going on here. This had quite different flowers going into it. It did have a few onion skins. And it also had some marigold flowers. And this one smells a bit better. And some, I had some red clover flowers, which I shredded and threw in there. That's really fabulous. Look at that. So the purple is really only out towards the edges, and the center of the scarf, which was what was exposed, is what's got really heavy purple. Alright, so let's unfold it. I apologize for the background noise. And we'll scrape the goo off of it. Oh yeah, I did have some birch bark in here too. I forgot about that. It doesn't really seem to have done anything. According to the natural dye books, you can get some really beautiful apricot shades out of birch bark, but I think what they really mean is for you to use the inner bark, which requires you to either take a down branch, ideally take a down branch, because if you are going to be harvesting bark from the live tree, you're taking down a branch anyway, because it most likely will not survive that. You'll just have to sacrifice that branch. So I didn't really want to do that, so I thought I'd just try some of the bark that peels off on its own. All right. So once the marigold flowers are out, you don't really see the yellow color as strongly, but you can still see hints of it in there. So, you know, marigolds are supposed to be good for dyeing, but it might just not work the way I've used it. So those might work better with a more typical mordanting process for natural dyes. Okay, I'm going to go and clean up this mess and get these scarves all washed up. Okay, everybody, it's the end of the evening, and the scarves have all been washed and pressed. They're not quite dry yet. Almost there. A little bit damp around the edges. And you can see that they've changed quite a bit. Now, recall that I didn't really mordant these properly because of the fact that I was using only vinegar on these. And so, you know, not unexpectedly, a lot of the colors have changed. So that's a little bit sad, right? Because we had some really fantastic pinks coming off of the maple leaves, but you know what? There's still a bit of interest going on here. Let's take a closer look at this. So on this one, this is the first one that we did. No, I'm sorry, this is the second one. that I showed you just laid out. And it's to the point where I can't even really identify what is what. Can I tell anything? There's some little spots on it. Do you see those little teeny spots there? Yeah, so those little teeny spots there, that's probably the only thing I can identify that's from St. John's Wort, partly because of the color and partly because I've seen it do that before. Almost maybe as if the little pores maybe on the ends of the vascular system are what's leaching out that color, but you know, that's me making a wild guess. Let's see. It still does have a fair bit of color and texture to it. A lot of it's probably from the onion skins, although maybe some of these places like this, maybe that's birch bark, because you see it has kind of a linear look to it. But I really can't remember right now how it was laid out, so goodness knows it could be anything. That's part of the fun of these things. Let's set that one aside. So this was the first one, yes, with all the different stuff on it, and you can see this has lost a lot of its color. If you look very closely, and I'm not sure you can even see it on camera. No, it's a little too transparent, but when you're looking through it, you can see the hints of the shapes and things that were on it. Interestingly, as much as I groused about that lamb's quarter, that's the thing that left the most clear impression. Can you see that there? Sorry, I can't seem to figure out how this camera works. Right there. So you can see its veins and everything. And then right next to it is some St. John's Wort leaf. Isn't that interesting? And then that'll be the St. John's Wort flowers. You can see there's a greater concentration of color there. And then we've got a few bits here and there elsewhere. Interesting, huh? It had so much color on it from those maple leaves, and you can't see that at all now. So it might be worthwhile to do a bit of dyeing with a better mordant, meaning something more typically used with natural dyes, and see if I can't get some color out of those maple leaves, because that was a pretty spectacular pink. And then here's the one that had the marigolds, and now that some of the other color has washed out, sadly, all of that maple leaf color has washed out, and the other stuff, although there's something there, I'm not sure what that is. This is why every time I do this, you get something a little different. You just don't know what you're going to get out of it. But anyway, what was I saying? I was saying that now that all the other color has leached out of it, I have motes of yellow on it from the... Can you see that? Just barely, maybe. Little bits of yellow. Okay, that's enough of that. And the purple is a little more visible now too. And you can see how it wicked, interestingly. Yeah, that's always interesting to see how color kind of breaks as it wicks into something. Okay, so that's the end of this short. It probably is not actually short when it's done, but at least it's not an hour long. And I hope you enjoyed watching. Come by the Ravelry group or say hello on Instagram, and let me know if you try out some eco printing by this not quite so eco or the real eco printing method. I'd love to see your pictures. Take care.